of miracle would it take to complete all of those deals in such a short window?
I think that the administration has to sit down and talk to our friends and allies and talk about where there is a win-win situation. Tariffs are such a club that really don't do anything other than offend those with whom we need to work together, both economically and in security matters. And what we're missing is a good dose of diplomacy.
Well, I'd love for you to bring us behind the scenes for a moment here, Ambassador, because you, of course, have actually negotiated trade deals, including NAFTA. And I wonder your thought on the prospect of running 75 simultaneous negotiations at once. Are these phone calls? Are we sitting down in a room? Are they all with Donald Trump? Who's the controlling authority here? And how quickly can you get all that done?
Well, I wish them well in any way they proceed, but they do need to proceed. You know, we have the highest tariffs that the U.S. has applied in 100 years, and we've hit 185 countries. It's really hurting our economy. You know, you drive up the costs of goods that we need to be competitive, and you hurt small and medium-sized businesses that actually account by numbers about 90% of our exporters, not in terms of value, but in terms of exporters. If they lose their business, they dismiss their workers. And this is a problem that we're going to face. I think that you raise prices for consumers. That's not good. That fuels inflation. You shut down small and medium-sized businesses. That's not good. Big businesses are complaining. Everything is on hold. So I think this tariff war is not beneficial to our nation.
Well, as you talk about big businesses, Ambassador, we heard the president yesterday floating the idea of exemptions for auto parts after complaints from automakers. He's talked about the notion of flexibility around consumer products like Apple's iPhones. And I wonder, as we've seen him kind of pull back the worst of the threats or float the idea of exemptions, if you see that as the administration actually losing some leverage in these conversations, if it's been proven that they are prone to change their minds on this.
I think it's a recognition that our industries in the auto sector are suffering. And I think he wants to put out a more of a friendly approach to this. But you still have a baseline tariff on all countries with this pause or for before everything goes up in July, and that is uncertainty. Our companies don't know whether they're large or small, what's going to happen.
I'd like to speak with you specifically about China and the language we heard today from Donald Trump. There's no difference between China. This was part of his call for Beijing to start negotiating. He said there's no difference, Ambassador, between China and any other country, except they are much larger. China wants what we have, what every country wants, what we have, the American consumer. Or to put another way, they need our money. Is there anything wrong with that statement?
Well, we need all of our trading partners. My goodness, we have benefited from our imports from China. They've benefited from their trade with us. Why do we give that up? When he says there's no difference between China and the rest, well, he has enormous 145% tariffs on China. Is that how he treats all of us that are outside the border? I think this is a big mistake.
Well, do you think it is one that is actually going to drive China to the negotiating table? Will these tactics work, in your view, Ambassador?
If you want a good negotiation, you sit down at the table and talk to the other side, fully understanding what their limitations are and trying to explain what our limitations are. We went through that with every country in negotiating in the Uruguay round and in the North American Free Trade Agreement. And we knew that it would be easier for them to reduce restrictions in some areas than in others. And so if you can't do it immediately, can you do it in 2 years, 3 years? What kind of a deal can we put together? And to sit and talk about it and get to know the other side of the table is enormously important. Not just to scream from where we are, we're going to put this on you unless you do exactly what we say. That creates, that gives support to the countries abroad from their populations. They don't regard it as showing respect.
Well, imagine having your former job now, Ambassador. We heard yesterday on Fox News from U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer about any expected talks between President Trump and China's President Xi. Listen.
China is the only country that actually implemented its retaliation and set it on this course. So obviously that's concerning, and the president has been very clear that he's willing to talk to his counterpart and that he expects that at some point we'll have talks. We're not there yet, but that's his expectation, and I share that expectation.
Ambassador, does this trade representative, as you understand it, have the same authority that you had when you had that job? Is he speaking for the president? Is he enfranchised here as he conducts these talks with other countries? Well,
I'm not an intimate advisor within this administration, but it appears that the people that the president has appointed are very anxious to follow whatever it is that he proposes. So I'm not sure that he is ready to accept advice. In the good old days that I recall, we would sit down with the president and talk about what the problems were, what our proposed solutions were, what we thought the opposition might be in our own country. You know, we have political problems to reducing restrictions that we put on goods and services. And so that we work together as a government seems more likely that that's being done very little today.
Well, so if you were on the other side of the table from the United States, do you really want to be conversing with anyone other than President Trump if it seems that all decision-making begins and ends with him?
Well, he can only speak to of the 145 nations that we are negotiating with a little bit. But I do think that if there's no question that his team is reluctant to make a recommendation that runs counter to something that he has said publicly. But that's the style of this administration. It's quite different than any, whether Republican or Democrat, that we've had before.